What are we feeding our mind? Hi friends, I am Dr. Rekha Kale, your success mindset mentor. Welcome once again to the mind material within us. In the earlier episodes, we have been looking at different ways in which our mind material expresses itself. We looked at our reactions. We looked at our choice of music. We looked at what we choose to watch and consume. We explored the relationships that become our tender shadow. And we explored those strange feelings of attraction and repulsion that sometimes arise within us without our consciously deciding to create them. Today, I want to take this inquiry one step further. Until now, we have largely been asking, what does my mind material reveal about me? Today, let us ask another question. What is happening to my mind material every day? Because perhaps our mind material is not something that is created once and then permanently fixed. Perhaps it is continuously being created, continuously being modified, continuously being maintained. And if that is so, then we need to look at something very important. Our surroundings, our circumstances, our habits, and even our food. Let me begin with something that many of us have heard. Experts, researchers, and different schools of thought have discussed the possible influence of lifestyle, environment, nutrition, sleep, stress and habits on our physical and psychological well-being. Our modern lifestyle is certainly very different from the lifestyle of previous generations. We have convenience on a scale that human beings have never experienced before. We have machines to do work that previously required physical effort. We have instant transportation, instant communication, instant entertainment, instant information. Food is available from practically every corner of the world. And technology allows us to do things while sitting in one place that earlier generations could never have imagined. All of this has brought enormous advantages. But it has also brought new challenges. There are concerns about pollution. There are concerns about sedentary lifestyles. There are concerns about highly processed foods and changing dietary patterns. There are concerns about irregular routines. There are concerns about excessive screen time. There are concerns about stress and the speed at which modern life operates. Different people have different opinions about which of these factors are most important. And we can certainly discuss and research all of them. But today, I want to ask a slightly different question. Can an individual completely escape all of this? Suppose I decide that I don't like pollution. Can I personally eliminate all pollution from the planet? No. Suppose I decide that I want every agricultural system in the world to immediately change from conventional practices to organic practices. Can I make that happen tomorrow? No. Suppose I want every vehicle in the world to immediately stop using polluting fuels and move to cleaner alternatives. Can I make that happen immediately? Again, no. Suppose I want the entire world to return to the lifestyle of 100 or 200 years ago. Can I do that? Obviously not. So what do? This is where I think a very important realization comes. Accept the surroundings as they are. Accept the circumstances as they are. Accept reality as it is. Now, I want to clarify something. Acceptance does not mean approval. If I accept that something exists, it doesn't mean that I believe it is perfect. It simply means that I have stopped denying reality. If it is raining, I can accept that it is raining. That doesn't mean I have to love the rain. It means I recognize the reality. And once I recognize the reality, I can decide what to do about it. I can carry an umbrella. I can change my route. I can postpone my journey. Or I can simply walk carefully. But standing in the middle of the road shouting, "It shouldn't be raining," is not going to stop the rain. This is a very simple example. But sometimes we do exactly this with life. We keep fighting against circumstances that we cannot immediately change. And in doing so, we use enormous amounts of mental energy. Perhaps a more constructive approach is, accept reality first, then adapt to it. And this brings us directly to our mind material. Because different people react differently to exactly the same circumstances. Imagine two people facing the same difficult situation. One person becomes extremely anxious. Another remains reasonably calm. One says, "Everything is finished." Another says, "This is difficult, but let's see what we can do." One becomes angry. Another becomes thoughtful. One gives up. Another starts adapting. Why? Is it only because the external situation is different? No. The situation may be exactly the same. Perhaps the difference lies partly in the mind material that each person carries. One person's mind material may contain more fear. Another may have more confidence. One may have experienced repeated failures and therefore expect failure. Another may have experienced challenges and learned how to deal with them. One may have developed rigidity. Another may have developed flexibility. And this brings us to an important quality: adaptability. Some mind materials seem to adapt more easily to changing circumstances. Some don't. Some people can suddenly change their routine when circumstances demand it. Others struggle enormously. Some people can accept new technology. Others resist every change. Some people can adjust to a new place. Others remain emotionally attached to the old environment. Some can change their opinions when they discover new information. Others continue defending an old opinion simply because it has become part of their identity. Why does this happen? Perhaps the answer is partly hidden in the mind material. And now comes an even more interesting question. If our mind material affects our ability to adapt, can our experiences of adaptation also change our mind material? I think this is a fascinating area for inquiry. Suppose a person repeatedly faces difficult circumstances. Initially, the person becomes frightened. But gradually, the person learns, I can handle this. The next time something similar happens, the reaction may be different. The person may become calmer. Why? Because the previous experience has become part of the person's stored learning. And therefore, perhaps the mind material is not static. It is continuously interacting with life. Now let us bring food into this discussion. The Bhagavad Gita discusses food in relation to three broad qualities traditionally described as sattvic, rajasic and tamasic. I am not presenting this here as a modern scientific classification of food. Rather, I find it interesting as an ancient framework that connects what we consume with the qualities or states of mind. And that itself gives us a beautiful question for inquiry. Can what we repeatedly consume influence the state in which our mind operates? We can ask the same question about food. We can ask it about sleep. We can ask it about exercise. We can ask it about entertainment. We can ask it about information. We can ask it about our relationships. We can ask it about our daily habits. Because we are constantly consuming something. Sometimes we consume food. Sometimes information. Sometimes emotions. Sometimes other people's opinions. Sometimes entertainment. Sometimes conflict. Sometimes positivity. Sometimes fear. Sometimes hope. And perhaps all of these become part of our ongoing mental environment. So perhaps the question is not simply, what has created my mind material? Perhaps we should also ask, what am I feeding it today? Think about your morning. What is the first thing you consume? Food, news, social media, messages, arguments, music, silence, prayer, exercise, and then think about the rest of your day. What repeatedly enters your mind? What kind of conversations do you have? What kind of information do you consume? What kind of entertainment do you choose? What kind of food do you eat? How much physical activity do you have? How much rest do you give yourself? How much time do you spend in nature? How much time do you spend with people who make you feel constructive and positive? And how much time do you spend with things that repeatedly disturb you? I am not suggesting that we can create a completely controlled life. We cannot. That is precisely the point. We live in an imperfect environment. So perhaps mental well-being does not depend upon creating a perfectly controlled environment. Perhaps it also depends upon developing a mind that can adapt intelligently to an imperfect environment. And this brings me to something very interesting. We often hear the phrase, survival of the fittest. Darwin's ideas are much more nuanced than the way this phrase is often used in everyday conversation. But if we use the phrase simply as a starting point for our inquiry, it raises an interesting thought. Perhaps fitness is not merely about physical strength. Perhaps the ability to adapt is also an important form of fitness. The environment changes. The circumstances change. The climate changes. Technology changes. Society changes. Our responsibilities change. Our bodies change. Our relationships change. and our mind has to keep learning how to respond. So perhaps one of the important qualities of a healthy mind material is not rigidity. It is flexibility. Not weakness. Flexibility. Not surrender. Adaptation. Not accepting everything blindly, but recognizing reality and then deciding what can be changed. That distinction is extremely important. For example, acceptance says, "This is the situation I am facing." Adaptation says, "Now what is the best way for me to deal with it?" And then comes the third step. Action says, "What can I actually change?" This gives us a very practical three-step approach. Accept. Adapt. Act. Accept what is outside your immediate control. Adapt yourself intelligently to the reality. And then act wherever you have the power to create change. This is much more constructive than continuously fighting reality in our minds. And perhaps this is also connected with our mind material. Because every time we successfully adapt to a situation, we may be creating a new memory, a new experience, a new learning, a new confidence. And perhaps that becomes part of our future mind material. So let us return to today's central question. What are we feeding our mind? Not only through food, but through everything. What are we feeding it through our surroundings? What are we feeding it through our habits? What are we feeding it through our relationships? What are we feeding it through our entertainment? What are we feeding it through social media? What are we feeding it through our conversations? What are we feeding it through our repeated thoughts? And perhaps the most important question, what are we feeding it repeatedly? Because something we experience once may remain a memory, but something we repeatedly experience can become a pattern. And patterns can influence the way we respond. So today, I invite you to conduct a very simple experiment. For one day, don't try to change everything. Just observe. Observe what you eat. Observe what you watch. Observe what you listen to. Observe the people you spend time with. Observe your routine. Observe your reactions. Observe your thoughts. And at the end of the day, ask yourself, what kind of mind material have I been creating and maintaining today? There is no need to give yourself marks. There is no need to decide, this is good, this is bad. Just observe. Because this entire series is based on one simple principle. Inquiry before judgment. Perhaps we cannot control everything that surrounds us, but we can become more conscious of what we allow to influence us. And perhaps we cannot immediately change the entire world, but we can gradually change the way our own mind interacts with that world. So perhaps the journey is not, how do I create a perfect world around me? Perhaps it is, how do I create and maintain a mind that can remain balanced, adaptable and constructive in the world that actually exists? That is a very different question. And perhaps it is a very powerful one. I am Dr. Rekha Kale, your success mindset mentor. And today I invite you to look within and ask, what am I feeding my mind? What am I feeding it through my food? Through my habits? Through my surroundings? Through my information? Through my relationships? And through my repeated thoughts? Because perhaps the mind material within us is not only the result of what happened yesterday. Perhaps we are creating tomorrow's mind material through what we repeatedly experience today. Keep observing, keep inquiring, keep adapting, and keep discovering the mind material within us. Thank you for being with me. I look forward to meeting you in the next episode.